So hello to everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Kevin Fitzpatrick, and I am the new Director of Development here at VIEW. And it is my sincere pleasure to welcome you all to our first conservation conversation of 2021. For those of you who don't know, at VIEW, our mission is to protect endangered wildlife by tackling the health threats that they face in their native habitats. And these conversations then are really VIEW's way of keeping people informed about our work, about what we're seeing, what we're learning, about our collaborators, and about issues in the field of wildlife conservation related to the health and well-being of animal populations. So tonight's focus, in case the title of the event didn't tip you off, will be moose in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And we'll discuss some of our recent work in the area, particularly in and around Jackson Hole. And we'll share some preliminary findings with you. So the first portion of the discussion will feature VIEW's Executive Director, Dr. Deborah McCauley. Deborah is a wildlife veterinarian who co-founded VIEW and has worked with organizations including the Wildlife Conservation Society, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, and the Bronx Zoo. Deborah has won numerous awards, way too many for me to list tonight, but including the Distinguished Ashoka Fellowship and the Emily Couric Women's Leadership Award. And then she'll be followed by Dr. Mark Drew, a former veterinarian for the Idaho Department of Fish and Game for 21 years, a member of VIEW's Scientific Advisory Council, one of North America's preeminent experts on moose, and really a leader in wildlife health in the region. And we're very grateful for him to be lending his considerable expertise to the discussion tonight. So just a quick reminder, before Deborah begins, we're gonna have everyone on mute for the evening. So if there are crying kids, barking dogs, or spouses who shout questions without realizing you're on Zoom, not to worry. But there will be a question and answer portion at the end. If you have any questions, please submit them via the chat function. Simply click on the chat button, type your question in and submit it, and we'll be happy to answer as many as we can. We want to be respectful of everyone's time, but very quickly before we move on, I do want to extend a very special word of thanks to the members of VIEW's Greater Yellowstone Guardians and the members of VIEW's Greater Yellowstone Conservation Crusaders who are joining us this evening. Please know that your kindness and your friendship are incredibly appreciated. Okay. So all that said, I think we're ready to begin with the first portion. Thank you again, all of you, for joining us. And Deborah, please take it away.
Hey, thank you, Kevin. I am really excited. Kevin just joined us. We had a generous donor support Kevin this year, and we are very excited because VIEW has not had a development director before, and we're very, very excited to move forward with Kevin and Alex. And we, so there's also a couple people, I can't see who's joined us today, but there are some people I really want to call out and thank for their support throughout the whole time we founded VIEW and worked in the Himalayas, and now is really instrumental in developing our Greater Yellowstone program. Dennis and Connie Keller, Natalie Orfala, I think Lou Buglioli may be there too. They not only supported us, but have given their time and attention. And I believe Whitney Telt has joined us too. A lot of advice on how to develop VIEW and where we should go forward. And it's been really, really helpful. VIEW is really founded on enormous amount of volunteer support. And we would not be able to do this without the support and volunteer hours that people have given us. So thank you very much for that. I, as Kevin said, have been a wildlife veterinarian. I was capturing wolverines at high altitude in the Rocky Mountain regions 15 years ago, even 10 years ago when I was pregnant, and 13 years ago when I was pregnant. And we were building surgical theaters out of snow to implant wolverines with radio transmitters. I was working for Fish, Wildlife and Parks, doing research with wolves. I actually co-authored a paper with Mark Drew, I guess probably 8 years ago, I think. And I've been really fortunate enough to capture tigers in the wild in the Himalayas. But there was really this gnawing problem in conservation for me, that it wasn't just habitat encroachment and anti-poaching measures, but that, like we're seeing with COVID, disease can have a major impact on populations. I was actually seeing 90% mortality events due to disease in bighorn sheep and other ungulates. We were able to diagnose things like tuberculosis in a rhino that they got from humans. And so we founded View because of the premise of really looking at that prism of how our threatened and endangered species can get a whole population die off due to disease. And that's what we're here tonight to talk about. We're going to talk about moose. You may think, if you're in the Greater Yellowstone region, that there's no problem with moose. Or you might be in New England and saying, you know, oh, we've seen a moose in our backyard. But actually, particularly in the past 10 years, there's been a major crash. We've been seeing a decline in North America for the past 30 years. In fact, what they're saying in certain regions, there's a 50% mortality events, as well as up to 60% in regions throughout Canada. And we're looking at that southern habitat, which we're seeing a major decline. So before there gets to be a problem, we need to find out why. And we were asked to come. We were working in the Himalayan region, and we came back to the Greater Yellowstone, and Wyoming Game and Fish saw a problem in the Jackson moose. There was about 200 or 300 moose in the Jackson region, and 50 moose died in the winter of 2019. Some of the folks were saying it was hit by car, because, you know, when you drive by, it's understandable. You see a moose and it's hit by car, you're going to think that's the reason. Or maybe it's due to predation. But we're scientists and we want to investigate cause of death. So just like in View fashion, we collaborate. Our program is about sustainability. It's not about View always doing the work, but it's about initiating a program, a wildlife health program, and helping out our stakeholders and the local folks. Our local collaborators are Wyoming Game and Fish, but we also always work with the university. So Montana State University is involved, as well as USGS. We have a veterinarian on the ground in the field, because when a moose dies, we need to immediately collect that information and those biological samples. We have Montana Montana State University PhD student looking at tick population, because what you're seeing in North America with that major decline, a lot of these moose are dying due to parasites, winter tick. So if I show you that picture of this moose up here, this is a moose that is very sick and very thin due to winter tick. Tens of thousands of ticks getting onto the moose. They lose all their hair, they become very thin, and they can't make it through the winter because of being very thin and no more hair, and they're not very good at shedding their ticks, unlike deer. And we're working with USGS because some of the idea is that disease is being implicated due to climate change. So we created a collaboration with our regional partners as well. We want to make sure that we're collaborating with our other researchers in the nation. We've also had 10 Zoom workshops to see what they're doing and share some of our work with them. Our veterinarians at View are helping to make our program sustainable by training safe capture techniques, as well as how to collect biological samples. Although they do have a wildlife veterinarian in Wyoming, the agency just doesn't have the money or the infrastructure to investigate things like moose. It's not a species that they're going to look deeply in, because it's a trophy species, not a major hunting species. And so there really is no infrastructure there. So we're training the local stakeholders at Wyoming Game and Fish how to investigate disease and how do you collect those samples and submit those samples, as well as collaborating with them on research. And the other really important thing that we do is providing infrastructure. We have developed a very exciting digital electronic medical record system so that we can look at moose disease in one location, just like when you go to a hospital and you walk into a hospital and they input electronic information into one place, then they upload your blood work and they can put x-rays and they can look at your histopathology, which is pictures under the microscope, and put it in one place. That's exactly what we've done for field personnel in the field for our partners at Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And this is new. Nobody else has been able to do that. Our preliminary results. So although in Wyoming, they thought that moose were dying possibly due to hit by car, they were able to raise $10 million to build a conservation bridge. And they said, moose are dying due to car traffic. And we said, fine, that may be the case. I'm going to move this. I'm very sorry. If you can see, that may be the case, but we have to scientifically investigate cause of death. We found that only 17% of our study, and I'm sorry, this is preliminary results. We are not done with our study. We're going to be doing it, finishing our study next year. So we can't give you all the specific details, but 70% of the moose that we have found have died due to hit by car. Yet 66% of the moose that we've investigated have died due to health-related reasons. So the impact that VIEW is already doing is showing that allocating $10 million, although that is really important, very important, if the reason is due to looking at moose mortality and trying to fix that problem, allocating money towards health is more important, or is very important. So we went out recently, as I said, since last year, started our study, looking at every moose that dies, going out and collecting that information to investigate why it died and if there's any health-related reason caused by that. We are very fortunate to collaborate with the diagnostic lab and Wyoming Game and Fish, because they are collaring the moose. So they look at the migration patterns and the behavioral patterns of moose. And so it also often offsets some of our costs as well. But Dr. Ginger Stout is in this picture right here. She's using a novel technique looking at artillery worms as well. They're finding that brain worms, artillery worms, and winter tick are some of the biggest reasons of mortalities in moose in the New England and Minnesota areas. So it's really important for this next year. We just had a capture event in January and February, collaring moose. So we're on the ground training folks on capture techniques, as well as how to collect biological samples. But at the same time, when a moose dies, there was a couple moose that have died, I think actually 7 since January. 2 of them was one calf and a mother who had gotten into antifreeze, and they died suddenly. Some of the folks in Wyoming are feeding the deer in these big troughs, and it's habituating animals to being able to feed in the big troughs. And what happened in this situation was that the mother and calf saw the big trough, they were habituated to it, and somebody had drained their RV of antifreeze, and the moose and calf got into it. Also recently, we had a cow, which is a female moose, who died of pneumonia, was riddled with abscesses throughout the lungs. And we're also seeing, another group was seeing the same thing in pronghorn. So it's very important to investigate cause of death and not make assumptions, because once we start to make assumptions on what the cause of death is, then we may be allocating our funds in the wrong direction. But what's really exciting about wildlife health and what's really exciting about VIEW is once we identify the problem, veterinary medicine has very clear measures of prevention and treatment. So I'd like to introduce Mark. As we said, I co-authored a wolf paper with him a number of years ago. I've known him for since the time I've been a veterinarian, as a wildlife veterinarian, And I'm really excited to have Mark join our team. And so, Mark, would you like to share with us some of the, your work in Idaho, which is the neighboring state of Wyoming, and how, what's unique about VIEW, and how, the agency, does look at health, but how we are different, and maybe tap in, because a lot of the work that Mark is helping us with is what I think is very exciting, but might not be so exciting, is our electronic medical record system.
Sure. Thanks for that, Deb, and welcome to everybody to this little conversation. My association with moose started when I was a graduate student in Alberta working on winter ticks. That was a long time ago. We had just invented kerosene lamps at that time, and we've progressed a long way since then. But my work here in Idaho with wildlife in general is some of the same things that Deborah's already explained. In Idaho, moose were considered a trophy species. And as long as the licensed hunters were able to harvest a sufficient number of animals, there wasn't any issue about moose. But we are also aware over the last 10 years or so that, like Deborah mentioned, in the Northeast, in the Midwest, and in Canada, moose populations are potentially going down and maybe even in trouble. We didn't recognize that in Idaho, but we don't also have any good population data. So for the last 5 or 8 years, we've been catching 60 to 100 moose a year, trying to fill in the health gap that may also be part of what's going on. The challenge that I had in Idaho in catching those moose, and we can talk about moose catching adventures and getting dropped out of helicopters into 8 feet of snow and wading rivers, and January trying to rescue a moose that we darted that decided to cross the river as opposed to staying on our side. But the important thing, I think, for this discussion is we've collected lots of data on lots of moose, like lots of other agencies, but we don't have a good platform in Idaho to collaborate with anybody, to do good data analysis and draw some assumptions about what's actually going on at the population level. We've looked at lots of individual animals, we've looked at lots of groups of animals, but on a population basis, we don't have a good way to do that. We don't have the right platform. So over the last year to year and a half, at Deborah's invitation to help with some VIEW projects, our hope is that we can take some of that data from Idaho that's very important. It's cost a lot of money to collect, but we need to figure out what it means. And the hope is that we can combine that with the platform that VIEW has with WIS and actually make some sense out of it and use it to collaborate with neighboring states and other places across North America and figure out on a larger level what's actually going on with moose. Because ultimately, if this is a habitat issue, the question is, why is that going on, and why is it impacting the health status of so many moose in so many places? And without that platform to be able to do that, the collaboration gets lost. And that's really important, that we're able to cross-pollinate, if you will, across a lot of different jurisdictions. And VIEW is extremely fortunate in having this capability, and we would love to be able to expand that and use this as a way to further evaluate and further look at what's going on with moose and how it relates to the things that are going on in this part of the world.
Great, thanks. I wanted to add one more thing. For this template that we've formed is not just moose. So everything that we're doing at VIEW is really the ability to expand into other species. So so thank you, Mark, for that. And I think, Kevin, you may have wanted a couple more words.
So I think now that you guys have given your perspective on things, I think we'll move on to the Q&A portion. Remember, if you have any questions, please submit them via the chat button on your screen. Just click on the chat button, type in whatever question you have, and submit it. I think a few have already come in, but in this portion, we really want to get a good discussion going and answer any questions you may have about moose, about VIEW, about anything really related to our role in wildlife conservation. So Alex, if you don't mind reading them off, I guess we can begin with the questions.
Hello, my name is Alex Carpenter. I also work for VIEW. I did get a question for either one of you. What are the biggest challenges when studying animals in the wild?
There are a lot. I think both of us can answer these questions. They're cool. First of all, when I was doing wolverine capture in the Rocky Mountains, I was an national ultra runner. They couldn't get a veterinarian out into the field to do the capture. So they were really limited on their study. And in fact, they built 9D traps throughout the Greater Yellowstone, but couldn't use any of them because they couldn't get the veterinarian to do the surgical implants on the wolverines. Wolverines are these little critters with these thick necks, tiny little heads, and you can't put a radio collar on them. So we had to actually do surgery in the field. I was like, that's perfect for me. I could climb any mountain, snowshoe, ski. We eventually helicoptered. And we would have to do it in the dead of winter because grizzly bears are sleeping during that time. And so we would capture the wolverines or the kits. I would surgically implant these little radio transmitter. It just took a few minutes to do the surgery, sew them up while they're sleeping, and then wake them up. And then we could investigate. At the time, there was unlimited trapping of wolverines, but we found that there were less than 300 in the lower 48. So there's a limited amount of trapping that's occurring in the state of Montana. I think the hardest captures that I've been on tiger capture is on elephant back. So you're not in the snow, you're in tropical climates. You're dealing with animals that can get really, really hot. That's the other issue with moose. You can only capture them at a really colder time. You sure can't do it in the summertime because they get overheated. And the drugs that we use, they don't thermoregulate very well at all, really. So that we as veterinarians have to really monitor them. So if we're talking about a threatened and endangered species, you sure want to have a veterinarian participate in that capture so that we can monitor. I remember one time I was out capturing a grizzly bear, and the biologist said, "Oh no, we knocked it out," and they measured its weight, and they said, "Oh, well, what the record tells me is I have to double the dose." And I said, "No, you don't. Watch and monitor the anesthesia. It's an old grizzly bear. His anesthesia is perfect, and I'll guarantee that he'll be sleeping for 45 minutes. And so it's sometimes really tough to get into the field, that you're actually doing some of these surgeries and anesthesia out in the field. You don't have the whistles and bells like you do in the hospital. You sure don't have the team if something goes wrong to help. You just have to, make sure that you're prepared. But it's amazing experience. I will say capturing a tiger is the most amazing experience in the world. But Mark, go ahead.
I would echo that. I mean, the biggest challenges are logistical. Trying to get all the things that you need to do veterinary medicine with the same degree of proficiency that you would in a veterinary hospital out in the field. So logistically, that's the biggest challenge. But the other part of it is the conditions that we have to work in. We're based in the field. That's where we want to be. That's where the animals are. The animals don't come to us. We have to go to them. And again, it's the logistics and trying to figure out how to do those things under field conditions, in 6 feet of snow, in the heat of summer, in conditions that are not necessarily conducive to really good, nice, happy adventures. It's a big challenge. And the other part is you have to understand that these animals don't necessarily want to be next to you. So we're going to use anesthesia to do that. But the challenge is making sure that these animals survive anesthesia under the conditions that we're trying to work with them. And it's a big challenge. It's also very gratifying to be able to do those kind of things. And the privilege of being able to work with some of these animals in those situations is really incredible.
Yeah, strapping surgical equipment and oxygen on your back and having to climb to 10,000 feet is a challenge in snow or post-holing in snow to do that. Although when I was younger, I loved it.
Kat Imhoff had a question. She would love to know what VIEW needs in terms of next steps, particularly in funding for 2021.
Yeah, well, we would like to continue our Moose project. So we're specifically wanting to fund and support our veterinarian in Jackson so that she can continue to go out and collect the biological samples that are needed. And also our wildlife health information system, the electronic medical record system, is in its beta phase. And we need to get it to the next phase in order to start to utilize it. So we're really fortunate that we're starting to use it for the Moose project, but we've had been asked by the Teton National Park, as well as we want to expand it to Idaho and be able to utilize it. And look, Mark has collected data on moose for the past 20 years, particularly in the past 5 to 10 years. We would like to upload all that information onto the wildlife health information system so that we can really evaluate what is happening on a disease level with the moose in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So those two fundings in the Greater Yellowstone is critically important.
I do have another question. Why do you think the assumption of moose being hit by a car was so popular?
Because you see it, right? And Mark, you can add to it. Literally, people are driving, in Jackson. They know that they hear that 50 moose died, and you see 1 or 2 moose on the side of the road. You're going to attribute. I have spoken to numerous people in Jackson, and they're like, "Oh, we know it's hit by a car. It's not disease." And I said, well, unless we investigate scientifically what the cause of death, we'll never be able to, address that issue. Right. And so our study will help, if not the people at large understand it, at least the agency being able to allocate funding for bolstering their program to investigate moose health.
Yeah, and it's the need to investigate beyond the obvious. I mean, but even if a moose died because it got hit by a truck on the highway, you have to ask the question about why was it there? Is it a nutritional issue that it can't get by in deep snow, so it's only going to be on the road? Or does it have parasites in its lung? Or is it hyperthermic because of the presence of winter ticks? This animal's got thousands of ticks on it and it can't regulate its body temperature, so it's weak, it's not going to travel. Is that why it got hit by the car? That's the obvious thing, but what's underneath that? And for those animals that are not next to the road, that nobody sees, then the added question is, what's going on with them that's either the same or different from the animals that are obviously smucked by trucks?
And maybe they're, so weak and sick that they can't get out of the way of the road and they get hit by a car because of that. And most people are just going to call it hit by car. Or predation, same thing. You've got a weak animal and it gets predated on by a wolf, but maybe the real cause, the underlying cause, was due to a parasite.
Right.
Or pneumonia.
Yeah.
Let's see. There are a couple more questions. So, have you ever been injured or had a close call when working with moose or any other animal?
Oh, yes. Oh, you want stories, do you? Okay. Couple times. So when I was a graduate student a long time ago, one of my jobs was to go out and actually steal some moose calves from mom to grab one of a twin so that we could establish a research group of animals at the university. So we were chasing a cow with twins once, and the cow reached up on her hind foot and hooked the skid of the helicopter and brought the helicopter down. That was exciting. One of those calves paid me back when it got to be about a year old. And while I was working with it, I was doing tick work with those moose, and that animal backed up into a corner and faced me and labeled me right in the door, right in the forehead, and kicked me out of the door. So yeah, I've broken fingers, I've been stepped on, I broke toes, all with moose. I've been hurt more seriously by bighorn sheep, but moose are very, very prominent in my injury list.
That's funny.
I have another question that says, are the follow-up effects of predation on sick moose, meaning can that disease pass to the predator?
So the tick parasite, there are a couple of parasites that are involved. And so when we talk about ectoparasite, it's what's outside of the skin is what's an ectoparasite. So the ticks. These ectoparasites, they're not, the ticks from Lyme disease, but they are shared with deer, and deer are able to shed them more readily, but the moose don't. They've got these thick noses, and and they're what's happening is, from a lot of the work is also looking at climate change and why would climate change be having an effect. They're seeing that the winters are shorter and these ticks are staying on the moose longer, and the moose aren't able to shed them as easily. They've got these thick noses, so they can't really shed them, so they start scratching them off, and they're literally scraping, as you saw on an earlier moose picture of a moose that has ripped off all their hair. So then once they get rid of their tick, they get rid of the hair, they really thin because their body is trying to stay warm in the winter, and so that's where the ectoparasite comes in. So that's one of the main issues. So yes, ectoparasites can be shared, but not, there's other ectoparasites that cannot.
Right, but there's also some parasites, particularly internal parasites, that moose are actually part of the life cycle for. So those parasites are usually a carnivore host of some kind, could be a cat or could be a dog, and an ungulate host. And the moose act as the incubator, if you will, for the juvenile stages of the parasite, and the adult stages are oftentimes in the carnivore. And those are passed directly by predation. That's the way the system is supposed to work. So there's lungworms that do that. There's tapeworms that do those kind of things. There's flukes or trematodes that do those kind of things, that pass from host to host to host as part of their normal life cycle.
So I have another question. So you did mention that winter ticks are a huge issue elsewhere. Are they here? And also, is it a climate change issue? And also, if you were to rank the top causes of mortality of these moose, as far as you know now, what would they be?
Let me take a stab at the winter tick part of that, since ticks are near and dear to my heart. Winter ticks have been around for a long time, for tens of thousands of years, probably evolved some way with moose and other North American ungulates. So almost wherever moose are found in North America, there are winter ticks, but there are also winter ticks found where moose are not. So there are winter ticks that exist primarily on elk populations. There's a particular group of winter ticks, a kind of a subpopulation of winter ticks that extend as far south as Oklahoma. And there aren't any moose in Oklahoma that I'm aware of outside of a zoo. So yeah, there's winter ticks most places where moose are found, and it's probably a co-evolution kind of situation. And they wax and wane. When I was a graduate student, we had moose in a national park that had as many as 120,000 ticks per moose. And if you think about that, that's 2 ticks per square inch, from the animal's nose all the way down to their tail. So that they can have a significant impact. And like Deborah said, these animals don't groom very well. They're very handsome animals, but they're not very coordinated, particularly in the sense of self-grooming. So they break a lot of hair off, and these animals will essentially be bald without any sufficient winter hair coat in January and February. And that's a huge problem. And that's one of the issues with winter ticks in particular is they're what we call a one host tick. All of the life stages are found on the same individual moose, the larvae, the nymphs, as well as the adults. And then the adults drop off in the summertime, lay eggs, those eggs hatch into larvae, and they go right back onto moose. So if the moose don't move out of a particular area, they're going to re-encounter ticks the next fall. And that's part of climate, that's part of ecology, why moose move or don't move, long distances or not, differences in summer range and winter range. That's all really important. And if there's an ecological reason for why moose are more sedentary than what they used to be, or non-migratory, that's an issue, because tick populations build up in sedentary moose populations.
So I have a two-part question here. The first one, what are the methods you has been using to work with other departments in the area that you guys are working in, or us?
Yep. So there is two parts. We do it so that it's a sustainable program. And we started our template in Nepal and built a wildlife health program there, and it worked really well. We work with government and universities. So with the Moose Project, we're working directly with Wyoming Game and Fish on a regular basis. We have a PhD student from Montana State University, and the federal agent is USGS that's investigating the climate change work. So on a local level, we are collaborating with them regularly. We have regular Zoom moose meetings, but before a capture, we have, it advances, on a weekly to daily basis, and prepare for those captures. But we are sharing our best practices, and we're looking at, hey, for example, there really is nobody identifying what the body condition of a moose looks like. How do you score it? How do you look at it? So we're putting down protocols so that everybody in the region can share that. And then we realized that, wow, we don't want to just work in the region, but we want to expand what we're doing on a national level. So we have also had about 10 workshops, so monthly meetings with researchers throughout the Rocky Mountains, as well as University of Maine, to Cornell University, to Tennessee, to other researchers that are doing moose work and climate change work on the ectoparasites, and working with them and putting together, what's their best practices and how can we work together, and so that we have a universal program to work on how to investigate moose. And that brings you back to the Wildlife Electronic Medical Record System, our WISP program, so that there is one place that everybody can work, keeping it universal. We're all about that sustainability, universal value, so that it's not just, I often had seen that we do our work because we see these missing pieces, that people work in silos and they don't share information. If you don't want to share information, don't part of the group, but we've had so much wonderful collaboration locally, regionally, and nationally, and we need to share our information. So that's what we're doing.
Perfect. And then another question. So do you think if a veterinarian had conducted the study on moose decline previous to the bridge being built, do you think it wouldn't have been built?
I don't know much about the bridge project. I was told, the only prism that I know is that a lot of folks, and I don't know if it's simply agency or probably, the community at large, saw this problem, saw that it was a moose decline, and said that they wanted to build a bridge. It's probably much more detailed than that. It is important to have conservation corridors. There's no doubt that bridge is going to help wildlife and help wildlife pass have a safe passage across a highway. That's really important. But if we're addressing the fact that moose are dying and we only build the bridge, then as you can see, so far, 16% were hit by car. A majority of those animals were due to health-related reasons. And what's so cool about veterinary medicine is often when we see a problem, there are the specific measures of prevention and treatment. Not always, but unless we understand cause, only then can we address what the problem is.
Great. I think this is our final question. Unless anybody else wants to type anything, please go ahead. What is your sense of hope for the Moose Project? What is the art of the let's see. Yeah, what's going to be possible in the next 5 years? There we go.
I'm going to answer that for the Greater Yellowstone. Our Moose Project is really pioneering wildlife health in the region, particularly for our moose, but we're setting up a template to help other species, to help do other research, to help investigate wildlife health, and to help with, as I said, training, infrastructure, and research. And so what our Moose Project is a catalyst for other work. And not just for view work, I mean a catalyst to show, just as we did in Nepal, that wildlife is a critical part of conservation. It needs to be included. You understand, or maybe you don't understand, there are only 2 wildlife veterinarians throughout the national parks. We want to see to have veterinarians and wildlife health included in conservation efforts. Our big picture here is to get wildlife included into conservation, and not just moose. And then specifically with the moose, absolutely. If there are ways and that we can work with the agencies and work with management in order to help increase and help a healthy population of moose, that's why we're there. And we're already seeing it, and we've only done it in 1 year. We're already seeing an impact of the work that we're doing on multiple levels, from showing that we have moose that are dying due to wildlife health reasons, not necessarily hit by car, from helping train the people, the agencies on the ground on how to investigate disease and toxins, and also working with the university students in order to incorporate wildlife health. This, and then the collaborators, we're already seeing that the collaborators are like, wow, why are we doing these silo projects? I literally had agency folks and university folks say, you know, I am so glad that you started this program. You opened the doors for us. You helped us communicate. So through our program, we're really wanting to see it grow, not only with moose, but creating wildlife health programs and showing how important it is in conservation. Great.
I think we're done.
Well, Alex wanted me to keep it to 8:45 and it's 8:44, so I did it. We will, if there are any other questions, you're more than welcome to ask us, to directly contact me, please. I love to hear feedback. We're just starting these conservation conversations, and it's really exciting for me to talk about our specific projects. I believe we'll be talking about One Health, how disease is shared with people, our domestic animals, and our endangered wildlife. We also be talking about our Tiger Project. We just came out with a paper that just hot off the press on tiger disease and new pioneering work on tiger disease in Nepal and in Asia, and what we're doing. And I'm sure we'll be doing an elephant project because we're doing a work in Myanmar. So anything else you want to close with, Mark or Kevin?
Kevin, go ahead.
No, I'll just say we'll follow up with all of you after this, but I hope everyone found it entertaining and informative. And I just want to thank everyone on behalf of you for attending, for your interest in wildlife conservation, and really for everything that you do to help protect these incredible animals and to preserve the world that we all share. So thank you.
Yeah, and just one last thing. Thank you, everybody who's on this, who have already helped support and is giving us advice and has been helping us throughout our work. I cannot thank you enough. We couldn't do this without you. So thank you so much.